Egypt buried its dead inside mountains of stone built to last 10,000 years. Its priests spoke to gods of sun and flood and harvest, and for 3,000 years, no army on earth had ever broken its walls. Then one shepherd walked into the royal court with a wooden staff, and within a year, Egypt's gods had been humiliated one by one. Its firstborn sons lay dead in their beds, and the empire that enslaved a nation watched its own army drown in the sea it once ruled. History calls it the Exodus. Most people know the headline: Moses, the plagues, the parting of the sea, but almost nobody asks the real question: why these plagues? Why this order? Why did a flood of frogs and 3 days of darkness mean more than ordinary disaster? Because they weren't disasters. They were a verdict. Each one was aimed at a specific god, a specific lie Egypt told itself about its own power. And by the end of this video, you'll see exactly which crime each plague was punishing, what modern science actually says about whether these events could happen at all, and why the ruins of Egypt's old religion still shape how the Middle East sees itself today. To understand the punishment, you have to understand what Egypt actually did, and it started 4 centuries earlier with an act of kindness. A man named Jacob brought his family into Egypt during a famine. 70 people looking for grain. Egypt let them stay. They settled in the region of Goshen, in the fertile eastern delta of the Nile, and for generations nobody saw them as a threat. They herded sheep, they had children, they were left alone. Then came a king who looked at the numbers and panicked. The book of Exodus says it plainly. A new Pharaoh rose who did not know Joseph, the man whose wisdom had once saved Egypt from starvation. He looked at the Hebrews, who now numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and he said to his own people, "Look, the Israelites outnumber us. If war breaks out, they could join our enemies." So he made a decision that defines tyrants in every century since. He decided an entire people were too dangerous to remain free and too useful to let go. He enslaved them, forced labor under the desert sun, building cities with mud brick and straw. Egyptian taskmasters stood over them with whips, and historians have actually found mud brick structures in the eastern Nile Delta, in the region of Pi-Ramesses, dated to roughly this exact period. Bricks mixed with straw, exactly as the text describes. It doesn't prove the Exodus happened exactly as written, but it proves the working conditions described in Exodus match what archaeologists have actually dug out of the ground. But slavery wasn't the worst of it. The Hebrews kept growing, so Pharaoh escalated. He ordered Hebrew midwives, Shiphrah and Puah by name, to kill every baby boy at birth. When they refused quietly, at the risk of their own lives, claiming the babies simply came too fast for them to interfere, he gave the order to every Egyptian household instead: throw the infant boys into the Nile. Sit with that for a second. This wasn't war. There was no rebellion to crush, no army to defeat. This was a king deciding that the solution to his fear was the murder of children who hadn't done anything except be born to the wrong parents. That is the crime this story is actually about. Not just slavery, infanticide ordered from the throne, carried out by a state that believed itself untouchable because its gods, the Nile, the sun, the soil, had never failed it. And in the middle of that horror, one mother made a choice that changed everything. Her name was Jochebed. She built a basket out of papyrus, sealed it with tar and pitch, and set her 3-month-old son adrift on the very river that was supposed to kill him. He floated into the hands of Pharaoh's own daughter, who pulled him out of the water, named him, and raised him inside the palace that had ordered his death. His name was Moses, and Egypt had just raised, fed, and educated the man who would end it. Moses grew up inside the palace, fully aware he was Hebrew, fully aware of what his people suffered outside its walls. At 40 years old, he killed an Egyptian overseer in a moment of rage after watching him beat a Hebrew slave, and he fled into the desert, where he spent the next 4 decades as a shepherd. Forgotten, irrelevant, exactly the kind of man history never writes about. Then in the wilderness, a bush caught fire and did not burn, and a voice spoke from inside it. "I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out. Now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh." Moses argued. He listed every reason he was the wrong man for the job. He stuttered. He had no army, no title, no plan, and he was wanted for murder in the country he was being sent back to. God gave him one instruction that mattered more than any of that. "Tell Pharaoh, let my people go." So an 80-year-old former fugitive walked back into the most heavily fortified court on the planet and delivered 4 words to a man who believed he was a living God. Pharaoh's answer is the hinge the entire story turns on. He didn't argue theology. He didn't ask for proof. He said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him? I do not know him, and I will not let Israel go." That single sentence is the real conflict of Exodus. Not Moses against Pharaoh, the living God against a king who had convinced an entire civilization that he himself sat at the top of the universe, answerable to nothing and no one. Pharaoh wasn't just a politician refusing a request. In Egyptian religion, the king was Horus incarnate, a god walking the earth, mediator between heaven and the Nile. The temples, the priesthood, the entire structure of Egyptian society rested on that claim. If Moses was right, Pharaoh's identity and the religious system propping up his throne was a lie built on top of another lie. So the contest was never going to be diplomatic. It was going to be a public demonstration, plague by plague, of which one of them was actually in charge of reality. Here is the part almost no sermon tells you. The 10 plagues were not random. Egypt had specific gods tied to specific parts of nature, and the plagues went down that list in order, dismantling Egyptian religion piece by piece in front of the one man who claimed to be a god himself. The Nile turned to blood. Egypt worshipped Hapi, the god of the Nile's flooding, and Khnum, who was believed to control its waters at the source. The Nile wasn't just a river to them. It was the bloodstream of their civilization, the reason their crops grew when the rest of the desert starved. God turned their life source into something that looked like death itself, and Pharaoh's own magicians could only watch. Modern skeptics have proposed a natural explanation, a toxic red algae bloom that can deplete oxygen and kill fish, turning water reddish-brown. Even if that's what physically happened, the timing, lining up exactly with Moses' warning, and the scale, the entire river system at once, is what the text insists you can't explain away. Frogs swarmed the land. Egypt worshipped Heket, a frog-headed goddess of fertility and birth. They prayed to her for healthy children, for safe deliveries. Now her sacred animal covered every floor, every bed, every oven, in numbers so overwhelming the count became its own form of mockery. Interestingly, this plague actually fits the algae theory too. Oxygen-starved water drives frogs onto land in massive numbers right before they die off from the same contamination. Nature explains the mechanism. It doesn't explain why it happened on command and ended on command. The moment Pharaoh asked Moses to pray for relief, gnats, then biting flies, filled the air. Some scholars connect this to Khepri, the god represented by a scarab beetle, tied to creation and rebirth. Once the frogs died in heaps across the land, decomposing in the heat, the conditions for insect swarms would have been perfect, and that's likely the natural chain reaction. But whatever the exact mechanism, the message was the same. Egypt's gods of order had lost control of the most basic level of nature. Insects breeding in their own land's wreckage. Egyptian livestock died of disease, while Hebrew livestock, kept separate in Goshen, were untouched. This one struck Hathor, the cow-headed goddess, and Apis, the sacred bull worshipped as a living deity in Memphis itself. Egypt didn't just lose cattle. It watched its own god die in the field, from a disease that, by the text's own account, respected an ethnic boundary line that no virus or bacteria naturally does. Boils broke out on every Egyptian body. Egypt had gods of healing, Sekhmet and Imhotep among them, the same Imhotep who, generations earlier, had been credited with curing plagues himself. None of their priests, none of their remedies could stop this one. The healers became the sick. Hail and fire fell from the sky, destroying crops that should have been protected by Seth, god of storms, a deity Egyptians believed they could appease with offerings, not one that would turn against the very nation that worshipped him. Locusts stripped every green thing from the land. Whatever survived the hail, this finished. Egypt's promise of endless abundance, the thing that made it the breadbasket of the ancient world, the reason every neighboring nation came to Egypt during famines, vanished in a single afternoon. Then darkness covered Egypt for 3 full days. This is the one that should stop you cold. Ra, the sun god, was the single most important deity in the entire Egyptian pantheon. Pharaoh himself claimed direct descent from Ra. Every morning, Egyptian priests performed rituals to help the sun rise. For 3 days, the literal source of Egyptian religious identity went dark, and nothing they did, no ritual, no prayer, no sacrifice, could bring it back. Some researchers have pointed to a massive sandstorm, a Kamsin, capable of blotting out the sun for days at a time. Even granting that, a sandstorm doesn't explain how the text says Goshen, where the Hebrews lived, stayed in light the entire time. 9 plagues, 9 warnings. And 9 times the text says Pharaoh's heart hardened, not because he didn't see the pattern, because admitting the pattern meant admitting his entire religious and political system was built on nothing. So the 10th plague came for the one thing Pharaoh actually was, a god-king whose authority and divinity passed to his firstborn son. At midnight, every firstborn male in Egypt died, from the prisoner in the dungeon to the heir in the palace. The only homes spared were the ones marked with the blood of a lamb on the doorframe, a sign of trust rather than status, available to any household, Egyptian or Hebrew, willing to follow the instruction. By morning, Pharaoh, the living god of Egypt, knelt over his own dead son and finally said the words he'd refused for a year. "Get up and leave." You'd think that would be the end. It wasn't. Pharaoh let them go, then changed his mind within days, the way prideful men always do when their humiliation starts to settle into memory rather than fresh pain. He mustered 600 of his best chariots, the most advanced military technology of the ancient world, and rode out personally to drag his slaves back. He caught them at the edge of the Red Sea, mountains on one side, water on the other, no escape route, no terrain advantage. From a purely military standpoint, the Hebrews were finished. Pharaoh had them exactly where he needed them. Then the sea split, not a metaphor, not a convenient low tide, according to the text. A wall of water on the right, a wall of water on the left, and dry ground running through the middle of the seabed. Some scholars have suggested a strong, sustained wind pushing back shallow water at a specific crossing point, and something oceanographers have actually modeled as physically possible under the right conditions. Possible doesn't mean ordinary. A wind that splits water on command, holds for exactly as long as an entire nation needs to cross, and collapses the instant the last pursuing chariot enters it, is not weather. It's timing no natural event has ever repeated since. The Hebrews crossed. Pharaoh's chariots followed them in, because pride doesn't recognize the trap until it's already inside it. And when the last Hebrew reached the far shore, the walls of water came down, and the most feared military force in the ancient world ceased to exist in a single moment. By sunrise, Egypt had no army, no heir to several of its noble houses, and no answer for what had just happened to the empire that had never lost a war it chose to fight. Here's the detail historians rarely put in the headline. Egypt never fully recovered the empire it had before the Exodus. The 18th and 19th dynasties' grip on the wider region weakened in the centuries that followed, and the era of total Egyptian dominance over the ancient Near East slowly came to an end. A nation that once stood unmatched spent the rest of its ancient history sharing power with empires it used to dictate terms to: the Hittites, later the Assyrians, later still the Persians, who eventually conquered Egypt outright. And the conflict didn't end with the Red Sea. The descendants of that Exodus generation eventually settled in the land of Canaan, in the same region where, thousands of years later, the modern state of Israel would be reborn, surrounded by nations that trace their own ancient lineage back to the same patriarchs. The argument that started in Pharaoh's court, who actually has the right to this land, under whose authority, has never fully gone quiet in the Middle East. It just changed which empires were arguing and which flags were flying over the same stretch of desert. That's the part that should actually unsettle you. This isn't a closed story from a closed chapter of ancient history. It's the opening chapter of a conflict still playing out on the news right now, between the same families, over the same stretch of land, under the same unanswered question Pharaoh asked first. Whose authority actually governs this region? So why did God destroy Egypt? Not for the crime of being powerful, for the crime of believing power made it untouchable. Egypt enslaved a nation, ordered the murder of its children, and built a religion that put a man on the same level as the force that created the universe. Every plague was a direct answer to a specific piece of that arrogance, aimed with a precision that no natural disaster, no algae bloom, no sandstorm, no freak wind pattern has ever shown before or since, even when each individual piece has a plausible scientific explanation on its own. Pharaoh asked, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him?" By the time the sea closed over his army, he had his answer. He just didn't live to use it. If this is the first time you've heard the plagues explained this way, as a direct takedown of an entire belief system rather than a string of disasters, you've only seen the surface of what's hidden in these books. Do you think Egypt's punishment was justice or judgment that went too far for what actually happened? Tell me your honest take in the comments. I read every single one. And if you want the next video where I break down exactly what happened at the Red Sea, hit subscribe now so you don't miss it when it drops.